All right, so here we are again, looking at numbers 104 through 107. We're going to hear some melodies in here that you might recognize, some really, really famous pieces of music from the symphony orchestra world. So you might recognize a few of these. If not, there'll be things that you'll hear as you move through band that you'll hear more often. So looking at number 104 to start. Right off the bat, I see some dotted quarter notes like we talked about in the last thing. In the first line looks like we've got one in almost every measure. So remember that a dotted quarter note adds half of the value to the quarter note, so those are going to be worth 3/8 notes or a beat and a half. And then the other thing that they talk about there in 104, if you look at the very end, it says D, C, al fine. That's Italian. DC stands for del capo, which means the head. Capo means the head. So the head, and then all means two, and fine means the end. So what that's telling us is when we reach the end of that second line, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning of the piece. So the beginning of the whole thing up on the top left there. And then we go until we see the word fine, which looks like fine. But since it's Italian, because everything has to be a little trickier in music, it's going to be fine. And we see fine at the end of the first line there. So when we play this, we're going to start at the beginning, read through the first line, go to the second line, repeat all the way back to the beginning, and then go to the end of the first line. Other than that, this looks pretty straightforward. We got to make sure we're checking our key signature as always, where there's another B flat. First valve. So anytime we see a B, which actually it looks like in this particular case there are no B's, so that makes things a little easier. But if there were any B's, they would all be flat. So here we go, number 104, Largo, super slow. Here it comes. So hopefully you could hear through there some nice, subtle, small dynamic changes. Those, again, just add some movement to the music, give it a little more emphasis, some nice changes that can provide a good difference for the listener. Okay, looking down at number 105, I would guess a lot of you will recognize this melody. If not, it's something I'm sure that you'll hear as you go. They introduce something called syncopation here, which is a fun word, a little tricky. And all syncopation means is anything that comes on an offbeat. Instead of 1 and 3, it comes on 2 and 4. Or instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it comes on 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So anything that comes in between is called a syncopated rhythm. So you hear some of that towards the very back end of this one. So here we go. Here is number 105. 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, so some big dynamic changes in there, down to mezzo piano after measure 9, and then a big crescendo to forte. At the end of the first line, we have a whole note tied over to another whole note, 8 whole beats that we've got to hold together there. So definitely pretty long. Looking over now at number 106, over on the next page. And what we've got here, it says accidental encounters. So if you look in the second measure, you'll see a natural sign. That's the thing that looks like a box with a line coming out of either side of it. That's a natural sign. So that's telling us that even though in the key signature we have F sharps, when we play that note, we're going to put down our first valve and play an F natural. Then we look in the next measure, we see on the Fs there, the sharp sign looks like a pound sign or a hashtag, but it's in parentheses, and that's what's called, as you see up at the top there, a courtesy accidental. So that's just something that the composer or the writer put in just to remind you that this should be a sharp. When we come to the end of the line, we see up in the top right that there's a natural sign. Look closely for that, and that tells us that for the rest of the piece, all of our Fs are going to be natural unless otherwise mentioned, which we see in the second line right off the bat. The first Fs that come up there are F sharps. So we've got to be paying super close attention during this one to where Fs are sharp second valve or natural first valve. Okay, so I'm going to play through this as marked andante, so nice and slow, which should help us a little bit with our reading. Here's how it's going to sound. Check this out. All right, that brings us to our last one, number 107. We've got another new concept being added in here, and it says right above there, DS al fine, which is a lot like what we had in the last video, DC al fine, but close listeners will notice that C and S are different letters. So C, if you'll remember, meant capo, which means head, which means go all the way back to the beginning. S stands for segno, which means sign, which means you're going to look for the sign. And in music, we almost always use the same sign, which is this sort of weird sideways S with a couple of dots and a line going right through it. And if you look, you'll see the sign at measure 5 in 107. So what 107 is telling us to do is play from the beginning. We go all the way through the first line, we go down to the second line, and then when we get to the very end, it says DS al fine, del segno al fine. So to the sign, to the end. So del segno, it means we're going to go to measure 5, where you see that sign, that little symbol, and we're going to go from there until we see the word fine, which you'll see on the second line, 2 measures down. Okay, so that's a kind of a lot to keep in mind, but as you do it more and more, you see these things that'll start to make more and more sense. So here's what 107 is going to sound like. This is a melody I'm guessing a lot of you will recognize. This is by Beethoven, one of the most famous composers of all time ever. Here is number 107. It's marked as maestoso, which means majestically, which isn't really a tempo marking, but more of a style marking, so it's not super helpful to know the speed. We're going to take it a little slow, but the actual tempo of this is pretty darn quick. So we're going to take a little slow, and then I'll play it through once at about the tempo that it's meant to be. But here is 107 a little slow, taking the DS to the Fine. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you caught that there at the end of the second line. We repeated back to the sign and not back to the beginning. Just for fun, here's 107 at about the tempo that Beethoven would have written it, which is pretty brisk, pretty quick. It would sound a little more like this. If you're looking for a little bit of a challenge there, you can try it up to tempo. Hopefully your valve doesn't stick like mine did. That's all I've got for you, Stowe trumpet players. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed. Hope this was helpful. As always, please reach out anytime if there's anything I can do for you. Hope you're well. Hope you're safe. Hope you're healthy. I'll talk to you soon.